Hey everybody, I want to make sure that my sound is okay and that you guys are hearing me. I need you guys to tell me because I'm at this point where I've had this device for a couple months, and if it's not working, I have to return it. All right. This thing was like a lot of dollars. Okay. Let me know in the chat if y'all can hear me, if it's clear, if the sound is great. Let me know. Let me know. All right. So we have our guests in the house. Before I bring our guests, y'all can hear me? Okay, perfect. Before I bring our guests up, I want to show you guys his social media so you guys can like follow and bombard and ask a bunch of questions. Absolutely. Here we go. Betteraskmatt.com. He's got a website. If you type up on Google betteraskmatt.com, his YouTube will come up, his Facebook will come up, and his IG account will come up. Everything. Uh, I consider this attorney an attorney friend of the channel. So thank you so much, Mr. Matt, for being here. And let me bring you up. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Can you hear me? I think I got a good test on it. We're good?
You're
All
good.
right. Very good. Very good.
Thank you. And before we get started, Wim, thank you so much for gifting channel members. You guys, if you got a membership from Wim, please put a heart in the chat. Thank you, Wim. So everybody's excited about this, Mr. Matt, because that is like the $1 million question right now. We want to find out about the Son of Sam laws and if this woman
Well,
profit. I don't know. What? Tell me.
well, the basic, all right, Son of Sam killings happened in the late 70s.
Hmm.
And after that happened, the state of New York wanted to prevent the Son of Sam and any other person who has done violent crime. They wanted to prevent them from capitalizing on that by making just a crap load of money from doing movies or book deals or things along those lines. And so New York passed the first of one of these laws, and then uh, 41 other states followed suit, and even the federal government enacted a statute of that sort. Well, under the New York law, and of course this is not a New York situation, but just bear with me on that. Under the New York law, pretty much what happened is that they created a special commission and or a crime victims fund or something like that. And the crime victims fund would be alerted of whenever Son of Sam or Boston Strangler or any other person who has been found guilty of a crime or was charged with a crime and admitted to it or whatever was going to capitalize on this. OJ, let's say, okay, and then they would have alerted the family and they would have basically allowed them to sue the perpetrator for a judgment, to get a judgment for whatever that amount was that they were getting, to basically disgorge them of profits of their wrongdoing.
Right.
Um, well, one of the big publishing houses back in the early 90s filed suit saying that that was unconstitutional. And the reason they said so was because of the First Amendment. and the thing about it like this, okay, imagine for a moment that I am some crazy, closet serial killer / rapist, whatever you want to say. Okay.
Hmm.
And I go and kill a whole bunch of people and I'm found out. And then I go into jail and I want to sell my story. I want to tell the world what happened and make a lot of money for my family and whatnot. Okay. Under that law, it would be prohibited. Under that law, that profit, those monies could have been disgorged. Okay. But let's say instead of me going and doing that, I write books and stuff on the law. I mean, I'm a lawyer, right? I write books on theology, though I probably wouldn't have a good right to do that if I were a serial killer. But
Well, I'm saying you're a lawyer and a serial killer, which, by the way, B. Tim said that he's disappointed in you that you're not wearing your bow tie for our conversation today.
well, thank you. And I well, I'll tell you where my bow tie is. Today I'm in Mississippi, and
Oh,
North Mississippi and Middle Tennessee is covered in ice. Now, you folks in Colorado and California and Alaska and all
yeah.
these other places, I mean, y'all are saying right now, hold my beer, okay? I mean, But we're not quite used to that, and so we have been snowed in. In fact, I have not gotten in my car in like 4 days, so I'm going to have to pull it out and drive around later today. So it's like, I've just been in, lounging around trying to stay warm clothes, if you want to get right down to it. But anyway, back to what I was saying. If I were to write books on anything other than mass murder or what I had done wrong, well, the state of New York wouldn't have been able to take that money from me. Okay, because it didn't have anything to do with my crime. It didn't have anything to do with whatever I was charged with doing. Okay. And what the U.S. Supreme Court said was, hey, fellas, what you're doing is that you are censoring one type of speech versus another. You are making it harder on publishers who themselves have got to make a buck, and limiting their access to talent, for lack of a better word, or people who are willing to write books. And you're basically saying you have, if it's about this subject matter, you can't make any money off of it. But if it's about other subject matter, you can. And so that is a clear violation of the First Amendment, the Supreme Court said. Now, they mentioned that there is a test to determine whether you could do something like that. And that is the compelling governmental interest, least restrictive means test.
Okay.
And I mean, do you want me to get deep in the weeds, kind of like how I was explaining that in the context of other areas?
However
Right.
you can get, as long as you can explain it to we the common people that
All right.
are not lawyers and serial killers.
Well, I won't go deep into the weeds quite yet. We maybe in a tangent later in the show we can, but
For sure.
But basically, what that means is if the government is going to tell you to do something that restricts a fundamental constitutional right, they've got to have a compelling governmental reason for doing it, and it has to be the least restrictive means of achieving that end. Okay, so let's say, for example, it's a national emergency. Maybe not coronavirus, but let's say there's been a nuclear attack or there's been something along those lines. Okay, all right, and the federal government is wanting to enact regulations of, when you can, or the government is wanting to enact regulations saying when you can leave your house, or when you can go here, or when you can go there, or can you go to your church, or can you go here, or whatnot. Okay, those things would, even if there are laws of general applicability, would impact your constitutional rights to go out and do things. Okay, and so obviously, if there has been a terror attack or something like that, that would be a compelling governmental interest. But even then, the government would have to come back and say, all right, here's the least restrictive means of us achieving that end. We only want you to not leave your house if you're within 100 miles of the ground zero, or you get what I'm saying. Okay, you've got to have boundaries for the government. There's got to be boundaries for how much they are taking from you and how they go about doing it. Okay. And so that compelling governmental interest, least restrictive means test is what the U.S. Supreme Court used to examine the New York law, and they found it failed it. And so they ruled that the New York law was unconstitutional. Okay. Well, fast forward about 10 years, New York amended the law, rewrote the law, and as best as I can tell, it's still being enforced.
Okay.
And what they did differently on this law was they said, okay, if you are a person who has committed a violent crime in New York, or you have caused a crime the victim is from New York, let's say. You've caused harm to a victim in New York. In other words, there's a New York nexus for this situation. Okay. And you make more than $10,000 for anything, for any reason, whether it's for selling books on the law or selling books on theology or selling books on serial killing. It doesn't matter, as long as it meets this threshold amount, and for whatever the source may be, then they've authorized the victims to be able to file suit, and they've extended the statutes of limitations to allow them to do that. Okay.
Okay.
And the object there is not to punish the speech or to keep people from necessarily capitalizing on their story. So it takes the First Amendment out of it, but it goes back to the heart of victim compensation. Okay. So that's
Okay.
how they fix that. All right. In New York, whether that's really been tested or not, I be honest with you, I haven't fully checked, but I do know that as of last month, there were legislators in New York wanting to amend the law to make it even broader. And I won't comment on that because I didn't read anything more than just the headline on that. Now, we're talking about the Gypsy case, I believe. Is that correct?
Gypsy Rose
Mhm.
Blanchard and the
Right. And
murder of her mother.
she committed her crime in Missouri, right?
Mhm.
Missouri is where she's from, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, as it turned out, Missouri was one of the 42 states that had enacted this Son of Sam law. However, after the Supreme Court struck down the New York law, Missouri repealed their law. So there is no Son of Sam law in Missouri anymore. Okay. Well, it's a moot point now, Charlotte, because the fact is, under Missouri law, there is no Son of Sam law. Gypsy is going to be able to capitalize and do whatever she wants to do as far as the state of Missouri is concerned.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, with that said, I mentioned that there was a federal law. Okay. Well, the federal law, number one, only applies to crimes against the United States, meaning, did she commit a federal crime or not that caused bodily injury? Okay. But that still really doesn't matter because the United States Justice Department has what's called a manual for U.S. attorneys. And in the manual for the U.S. attorneys, they talk about the statute that covers the types of forfeitures we're talking about. And the U.S. Attorney General and the Justice Department have reached the opinion that that is inconsistent with the First Amendment. And therefore, they've essentially directed their U.S. attorneys not to try to go after money under the federal Son of Sam law. So for all intents and purposes, there is no federal Son of Sam law anymore. Okay. I mean, it's on the books. It's just not being enforced. Okay.
Ooh.
Now, Louisiana, Ginger, that's an excellent question. Well, as it turns out, Louisiana also was one of the 42 states that had a Son of Sam law, but they too also repealed it. Okay. So there's no Son of Sam law in Louisiana anymore, from what I researched yesterday. So the next avenue that you might be able to go is, okay, California's got one. And if you're going to be doing movies and you're going to be doing things like that, I mean, you're going to be going to California, right? Okay. Well, the issue is this: in California, the law specifically covers only people who broke California law. So as best as I can tell from my study of this, and it wasn't a very exhaustive study by any stretch, but from what I have looked at the existing statutes and the Hornbook studies, it appears to me that there is no Son of Sam law that would apply to Gypsy Rose that would prevent her from capitalizing on this. Now, I see Tim has a question. How did Netflix not pay for Gypsy Rose then if there is no Son of Sam law? I don't understand the question, to be honest with you. A lot of double negatives there that kind of confuse me on that one, and I apologize.
Tim, can you explain the question in the chat? If you can. Did you mean how did Netflix not pay for Gypsy Rose if there's no Yeah. Let me know in the chat if you can explain that. And then there is another question. It's a statement. She was convicted in MO because that is where her and DeeDee lived at the time of the murder.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So Missouri law would be Missouri law and federal law
Same.
would be the primary law. Well, Missouri law would be what would govern because it was a purely Missouri crime. And there is no Missouri Son of Sam law anymore. There used to be, but it got repealed. So, well, Peekaboo, you've got a valid point in the sense that you don't want people to profit from their crimes. That's true. But one of the things that we have to be very careful about is in trying to solve one problem that we don't create other problems. Okay?
Yeah.
And one of the bigger problems that we have to protect ourselves of is intrusion from the federal government infringing upon constitutional rights. Um, because the problem is, if the federal government can, or the state government for that matter, can identify what speech should be encouraged and what speech should be disencouraged or discouraged. I think I almost did a George W. Bush with strategery there, right? Disencouraged. Um, the when the government starts to encourage or discourage speech, then that gets into the concept of prior restraint and First Amendment
First
issues, and you
Amendment.
don't want to get into that, because if the government can do that for this, you can do that in others. See, Molly asked, "Are we sure where she is living?" I'm in Tennessee, and a bunch of local places in Middle Tennessee keep posting for pics, shopping, and eating. And well,
I don't know.
again, I'm licensed in Tennessee, and in fact, I was actually planning on being up in Nashville on Monday for court, but that got canceled. Um, but I digress. The thing about that, though, is, again, each of these laws, more than likely, when they go from state to state, are going to impact the issue of where the crime was committed and where the victims were when the crime was committed. So chances are, even if Tennessee still has a Son of Sam law, which I'm not quite familiar with, to be candid with you, which is as a Tennessee attorney, I probably should know that a little bit better than I should. But um, at the end of the day, the fact is that's not going to apply to her no matter what, because
Hmm.
the crime happened in Missouri, and whatnot. Now, I guess depending on what the statutes say, if somebody moves to a state and starts making money, yeah. But then you get into the question of whether or not the Supreme Court's ruling in 1991 would have a prejudicial effect under the enforcement of that statute, which is why the reason why those laws, many of which have been gotten rid of. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't think realistically that there's a way that she's going to be prohibited from making movies or books and things along those lines to tell her story. I really don't. I tell you something. I don't know if are you old enough? I mean, have you ever heard of the movie the Birdman of Alcatraz?
No.
Folks in the
Maybe in
chat,
the chat.
ask
You
anybody in
guys
the
in the
chat if y'all
chat.
ever heard of that story.
Birdman of Alcatraz?
Yeah. Hmm.
Birdman of Alcatraz. Anybody heard in the chat? Type a yes. Say @rabbit. Yes, I've heard of the movie. See how quick the chat will move. Okay, Teamaker said yes.
Okay.
Look, you got some yeses over here.
Let me tell you
Okay.
what that story is about, and let me explain how that might have impacted in a Son of Sam a way. Okay. So, in 1919, there was a guy, I can't think of his name. He was in federal prison somewhere in the United States, and he got into an argument with a guard, stabbed and killed the guard. Okay, and of course, back in the day when that happened, you had the death penalty. He was going to go. He was going to die. Okay. Well, if you know a little bit about history, you know the president at the time was Woodrow Wilson. And you also know at the time President Wilson had a stroke, which meant that for all intents and purposes, the president of the United States was Edith Wilson, okay, the first lady, because pretty much Miss Edith Wilson had a complete bottleneck of anybody who got to see the president, and any documents that went to the president went through her. And she basically told the president, "You're going to sign this. You're not going to sign this." Okay. So the mother of this guy had an audience with Mrs. Wilson in the White House, which to me is amazing. 100 and something years later, that you could actually pick up the phone and say, "I'd like to speak to Jill Biden. Can I have a meeting with Mrs. Biden," or something like that? No, 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 not today. But 120 years ago, 115 years ago, you could. And so this woman met with the first lady and convinced the first lady to, convince the president to give him a commutation. Okay. So this guy, whom you'll soon find out why we call him the Birdman, was his death sentence was commuted to life in solitary confinement. Okay. So he was in solitary confinement, and he could, couldn't interact with other people. He sat in his cell all day. And while he was sitting in the cell all day, he started to make observations about birds. And eventually, he's called the Birdman of Alcatraz because eventually he was transferred over to the island prison, Alcatraz.
Mm-hmm.
And in both prisons where he was at, I think the first one might have been Leavenworth, the other one was Alcatraz. While he is there in solitary confinement, observing birds, he made scientific discoveries that actually prevented and aided farmers in the United States, chicken farmers and poultry farmers, when there was an avian flu that came by. And he actually saved most of the chicken crop of the United States that year from his studies in the cell in Alcatraz. Have you ever heard that story?
No.
Okay. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, Burke Lancaster, exactly. Excellent movie. Now, I've spoiled it, but hello. It's a 60-year-old movie. If you hadn't seen it now, I mean, I'm not going to like walk on eggshells and not tell you ruin the story.
You won't ruin.
All right. Well, I'm telling all that to say, some of these Son of Sam laws are very, very, very broad. Okay.
Okay.
So when this guy wrote the book, or somebody else may have written the book for him, I don't know if he wrote the book. Maybe he wrote the book. Let's say he wrote the book. Okay. If he had written this book and was telling his story, and he started talking about how he got into the mess he's in from the very beginning to the very end. Oh yeah, I killed this guy. Shouldn't have done it, but I'm in solitary confinement. By the way, here's some birds. I saved the world. Okay. If he had written a book like that under a Son of Sam regime from 1978 to 1991, he wouldn't have been able to make any profits off that book because it in some way touched upon his crime.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Now, you and I would, in hearing this story, knows it has absolutely really nothing to do with the fact that he killed a cop and he's trying to capitalize on that. But as broad as those laws are, that could have been considered a restriction in that respect. Okay.
Here's B. Tim clarifying the question. Sorry about the double negative, LOL. But yes, how did Netflix get away with creating a series about Gypsy Rose and not pay her for that series?
Well, I think that is sometimes it has more to do with the source of the story as opposed to who the story is about.
The arrangement, maybe that's...
That has more to do with an intellectual property question than it does for example, okay. All right. I'll give you an example of something. Several years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman who went down in photographic history. Okay. You remember the Oklahoma City bombing?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember that iconic photograph of the fireman carrying the baby out of the rubble?
No, let me Google search it.
Okay.
But go ahead.
All right. That photo was of a fireman that I had occasion of meeting a few years back. Very nice guy. I can't think of his name off the top of my head. I'm Facebook friends with him. Very nice guy. Okay.
I see it now.
Well, you don't want to show it. Okay. But that photo became an instant international icon of what happened on that fateful day. And for many, many years, there was litigation over the rights of that photo because the photographer had the rights. And people who were in the photo wanted to use the photo for other things. And the photographer, there was litigation about that. I'm not going to get into that because I don't remember all the particulars. I'm using that as an example to show that sometimes people, if I sit here and I write a story about something that I personally observed about someone else, and the information that I have gathered is from my own sources, then the book that is the basis for the copyright is my story, not the story of the person who lived it, because I wrote the
Okay.
book. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
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 So that's my best guess as the answer to that question. It has nothing to do with Son of Sam laws.
If this crime had been committed in New York, would this be a different situation, do you think?
Yeah, because I mean, for example, if Gypsy ever got paid more than $10,000 for anything, um, well, let me back up to this question. I like this question. Or a better way to say it: does Netflix own the rights to her story? The answer is no, because
Did Netflix buy her story?
here's the thing: the story that is purchased is always owned by the person who wrote the story, the author.
Okay.
Okay? The author who is perceiving things of his. Okay, so when I have a personal story and I want to sell you the rights, I'm essentially selling you my story, my version of the story. Okay. And personally, if it's about my life, I'm naturally going to have more information at my disposal than someone else who doesn't necessarily know everything about me. Okay. But on the other hand, if I happen to become a public figure one day, and let's say I became governor of Mississippi or mayor of Tupelo or U.S. senator, whatever the case may be, and a local newspaper was starting to write a whole bunch of stories about me and following me around, then assuming that that was newsworthy and there was something to it, if Netflix wanted to buy that, they could buy it from that person because it wouldn't be my story. It would be the author of the article's story. You see what I mean?
Gotcha.
Yeah. So
So when It Talks Baby Girl says no, in prison or jail, the prisoner has no rights per se.
it has nothing to do whether or not you're in prison or not. What I'm saying is that whenever you're writing a story, if I'm sitting right here and writing a story, whether it's fictional or true, okay,
Right.
that story is my intellectual property. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the question, however, is the source material for that story. Okay. If the source material of that story is something that I independently got myself through my own interviews, through my own talking to people or whatnot, then I have the copyright. Okay. Because I've written that. Now, on the other hand, if I am deriving this from the written works of others and the newspaper articles of others, that becomes a derivative copyright and you have to get the rights from those people. Okay. So all I'm saying is that this has nothing to do with whether she's in prison or not, whether she has rights as a prisoner or not. It has to do with copyright law, which is
Okay.
okay, what everybody deals with.
Right.
you know, so but
Going Go
but
ahead,
to
I'm
answer
sorry.
your question about it, this we're in New York, yeah, it would make a difference because if, let's say, Netflix or Hulu or somebody else bought the rights of her story from Gypsy and wanted to tell her story and they paid her $100,000 to do it, then in that hypothetical, that would trigger that law, you know, for that purpose. But let's go a step further. Let's say Gypsy decided, you know what? I don't want to tell anybody about my story, but I became a darn good cook in jail, and I'm going to go and go on the Martha Stewart show and start talking about my recipes and whatnot. And if she started to sell a book or make stories about that and made more than $10,000 under the New York law, their victims could come after them for that. Okay. Um,
Interesting. So Nicholas, as her co-defendant, would
mhm.
be able to capitalize on his side of the story if someone interviewed him or if he wrote a book, but he's in prison.
Yeah. I mean, given the fact that that happened in Missouri, he's a Missouri rep. You get what I'm saying? Yes. I mean, that yeah, because again, again, I'm no Missouri lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice. Okay, but given the fact that there is no law, no Son of Sam law that applies, and even if there is a law, there may be some strict scrutiny types, where you have to have the compelling governmental interest with the least restrictive means. Could be that the existing laws as applied to their situation might not even be constitutional. So, yeah, short answer.
Wow. And these are codependents. So I would imagine like listen, I've learned a lot in the last 24 hours. I didn't know that we were talking about Scott Peterson yesterday, that he had done some lawsuit against the family too. And
Yeah.
so like I didn't know that that was
By the way,
possible.
little Scott Peterson trivia. Do you know who he was on? Who was on his high school golf team with him?
No. Oh no, no. No.
Phil Mickelson,
Oh really? What?
the famous pro golfer Phil Mickelson, and Scott Peterson went to high school together and on the same high school golf team.
Did they ask him for comment about the murders?
I don't know. I just remember that from years ago.
Wow. See, that's
Um,
trivia I didn't even know.
little obscure
Well,
fact there.
and it simply means says how to become a millionaire, like jailbird celebrities. Oh my goodness. I love these intellectual conversations. Make my little nerdy
Now, back up to that
people.
last thing about the jailbird millionaire. Okay, now,
Yes.
let me back up for a moment. Okay, there's a difference between punishing a person by keeping them from making money off the fruits of their crime. Okay, but there's another thing different from that, and that's the compensation to the victims. Okay, so let's say, for example, all right, I have a case where I went to federal court back, when was this? 2019. And I sued I sued a county for civil rights violations, and I sued the inmate who caused the harm to my client. Um, and the federal stuff has been dismissed. There's state action still against the county. I won't get into that, but we got a default judgment in federal court against the inmate. And so this inmate had done something very awful to my client. I won't even, it's lunchtime. I'm not even going to tell anybody that you might be eating. Awful, awful situation. And we got a default judgment against this guy for like $250,000, $1 million. I can't remember, maybe 1,250,000. Of course, he ain't got two pennies to rub together. Okay. But let's say this guy did decide, I know what, I'm going to write a book and tell my story. And he got a publisher, and, well, guess what? I've got a judgment against him. I can
You
just go
can
collect that
collect.
money. Okay. So if you're a victim, you have, subject to the statutes of limitations, you have the right to just sue that person and then get a judgment against them and just sit there and wait on it until they make some money, until they sell their story. And in most jurisdictions, many jurisdictions, like for example in Mississippi, your judgment is only for 7 years, okay? But between the 6th anniversary and the 7th anniversary, you can renew that judgment for another 7 years. And you
Oh
can
my
keep
gosh.
doing that ad infinitum so long as you don't miss that period of time in that 1 year to renew. So I could get a judgment against somebody and perpetually renew it, depending on what state you're in. Okay, it varies from state to state, but perpetually renew the judgment until such time as if he finally falls into some money, or he finally wins the lottery, or if he finally does this, then I can go ahead and just execute a garnishment, a writ of attachment, get that money. And it's just as so there is an avenue for victims to get compensated if they get this money. They just have to sue their assailants and get the judgments against them before the money gets in their hands. Okay. Um,
Wow.
or before the money gets in their hands and they spend it all.
Could say like Nicholas who's sitting go to John who's sitting in jail,
Mm.
co-defendant, could he sue Gypsy? Could he say I'm gonna like because this is a shared, I guess, story to a certain degree. I'm just wondering, like, people are so
Well,
happy.
no. Bear in mind, I'm talking about the victim suing. I'm
The
not talking about
victims,
a co-defendant. Okay,
but I'm just curious,
but
I
no. I mean,
right.
no. I mean, I don't. You don't. All right. So a California inmate could not profit off the crime, like Danny Masterson can't write about his crime and profit from it. Well, let
California's
me answer
different,
you the
no?
question this way. When I looked at this California law yesterday, I was looking at it more under the view of trying to figure out if this would apply to Gypsy Rose or not. Okay. And the first thing I did was look at the definition statute. And when I saw this had it only to do with California law, and this was not a California situation, I just said, I ain't looking any further because it's not worth my time to study this. Okay.
Mhm.
So to answer your question, I don't know as far as California is concerned, but I would suspect that if the California law is written in such a way, you know, you know, if written in such a way that if the statute is written in such a way that you can go after that person without infringing on their First Amendment rights, and it's more of a compensation scheme as opposed to a punishment for speech scheme, then yeah, I mean, I'm sure the California law would be able to keep Danny from making money off of his crime. But I have not studied that law, so I can't say that with a requisite level of
Yeah.
ontological certitude. Okay. Um,
Cece says or asks, well, it's a statement reporting on a convicted felon's life does not require payment to the felon. Okay. If released from prison, they write a book and people want to buy it, then that's on the people.
that's right. I mean, it's um, now let me back up and say one thing about buying rights. Just
Okay.
okay. Sometimes when you're buying the rights to a story, you're also buying the imaging rights and the rights to keep image likeness, kind of like a college football player these days. Okay, NIL. All right. So those are some packages, and that's some stuff that you would get from only the person and not. So, for example, let's say if they wanted to buy Gypsy Rose's story and they wanted to, they could pay her for the interview and then have her images and her picture and her likeness and all that kind of stuff as a package of what they're doing. Okay. But if we're just simply talking about the narrative of the who, what, when, where, how, so long as somebody else with competent firsthand knowledge of those events is the one telling the story and not her, she doesn't have to get the money for it. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Gotcha. And then CC adds, if the felon writes a book that hurts victims and their family, then a lawsuit will take place, and all the money from the book goes to the victim.
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Okay.
Ooh.
Remember, when you're writing books or telling stories or whatnot, you've got obviously the big protection that you have is the First Amendment. But one of the longstanding exceptions to the First Amendment law is defamation within certain limits. Okay. So let's say, for example, um, you know, the this story has gotten a lot of worldwide attention,
Mhm.
and the victims' families, as a result, have become household names. Okay, like Taylor Swift or something like that. Okay, then the burden of liability in a defamation action is much higher because they're considered public figures. Okay,
Right.
but even so, if I wrote a book about someone and it hurt them, hurt is a very nebulous term. Sometimes the truth hurts. Okay, if if I say to somebody that um, the food you fixed me tonight is awful, well, that's an opinion. It's not truth, but you get what I'm saying. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
long as long as what a person is saying is truthful, it doesn't present them in a bad light, that doesn't imply negative things about them that are not true. Okay. Um, then a body could get away with writing a book like that and wouldn't be able to get any compensation for the victims just because of the book itself. Now, again, if I committed a crime and I was sued for it and I wrote a book um, and made money off of it from the book, or if I made money as a lawyer, or I made money, you know, buying the lottery or something like that, that would be different. So
Right. SW, that was a question we asked earlier. Can Nick sue Gypsy as a victim? Well, he's not a victim. He's a co-defendant in this case. So I don't think that that's possible. I don't know. That was an earlier question. Matt at the World says buying the rights would protect them more from a defamation case. Blair says, "Hey Matt." Um,
hello, Clara.
Gina says, "I'm coming in late. He might have answered this. Yes, Nick can write a book and get paid. That's what we've learned today. That he can write a book and get paid."
Now, again, Now let me back up for a moment, okay?
Yes.
Victims have the right to sue the defendant for the
Yes.
harm that was done to them, so long as they do it within the statute of limitations that are allowed for them. Okay,
So he could write a book, but he can get sued
for
by
the
the
underlying
victims.
crime,
Absolutely.
so long as the statute of limitations hasn't run.
Okay. Gotcha.
Now, here's the thing: statutes of limitations for torts like this are usually, I mean, relatively short. I mean, or I'll give you an example in Mississippi. An intentional tort like an assault is a 1 year statute. Um, in Tennessee, it's a 1 year statute. Okay, so you got
Okay.
1 year to sue. Now, if the victim was under the age of majority, which if you were saying Tennessee would be 18, Mississippi would be 21, you would have the right to. The statute of limitations generally would not start until your 18th or 21st birthday, as the case may be, or whatever the state you're in, the age of majority is. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, but there are some statutes called statutes of repose, which are like statutes of limitations on steroids that say, notwithstanding any type of tolling for disability or anything along those lines, the cutoff is right here, right now. And that varies from state to state. Okay. Um, so, depending on the statute of limitations, there may not be any remedy if they haven't
Yeah.
already sued by now. Okay.
Yeah.
That's-
Interesting. Blair says there isn't. Oh, hold up. Isn't there a Son of Sam law that would prevent Nick to? No, we just answered that, Claire, earlier. There isn't. Or it was
The law
repealed.
was, Clara, the Son of Sam laws that were originally enacted in the 70s, the one in New York in particular, was found to be unconstitutional. So New York had to rewrite it. Missouri, where she's from, and Louisiana, where I think she lives now,
Yeah.
have since repealed Son of Sam laws. So they don't have them
So
anymore.
for
In the U.S.,
both.
and the statute that is a federal Son of Sam law is not being enforced because the
Gotcha.
Justice Department thinks it's unconstitutional. So no, you really can't.
Jamie says if something is truthful but the person wasn't convicted, can the victim still tell their story, or is that problematic or legal? I'm not sure.
If something is truthful, but the person what? Okay, let's use, uh,
Do you want me to show the question again?
Oh, well, let's back into the statute of limitations, right? We'll go back to the other question in a second. The statute of limitations for victims asserting an SOS claim in New York is 3 years from when the profit is discovered. That's true. That's true. But we're dealing right now, though, with a Missouri case where there is no Son of Sam law to begin with. What I'm meaning in the broader context is, let's say I get a gun and I just start, plowing people, okay? And I'm doing it here in Mississippi. All right. Unless I shoot a minor, if let's say I shoot and kill people who are of over the age of 18, or maybe I don't even kill them, I just shoot them. Okay, and they're all over the age of 21, and none of them have mental incapacity issues. They would have exactly 1 year under Mississippi law to sue me for that for that intentional tort. And if they found any other negligent tort under Mississippi law, they would have 3 years to sue. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. For the underlying tort. And in that particular circumstance, what I'm saying is that the victims of those who were actually harmed by a crime can always sue the perpetrator for the underlying crime, regardless of whether they write a book or not. They just have to do it within the statute of limitations for the underlying crime. Now, if there is a Son of Sam law, like if you are in New York, then yeah, you got 3 years, because one of the things that's neat about the Son of Sam law in New York is it actually resets the statutes of limitations. It alters the statute of limitations, like she's saying, so that you can go ahead and refile that suit. And New York has a history of doing that kind of stuff. Like, for example, all the Me Too laws that have come up. Okay, the fact that people have been sued for sexual assaults that happened in
Years ago.
1991 or 1992. Well, under the
Yeah.
original laws, the statute of limitations would have expired. Well, following Me Too, New York enacted legislation that revived the statute of limitations until if I'm not mistaken, the end of last year to file stuff.
Absolutely.
So don't mix up the son of Sam aspect with the underlying tort of the crime. Okay, if there is no son of Sam law, you can always sue for the underlying tort and get every penny that's not exempt from creditors um, from that person, provided you get a judgment and you file the lawsuit within the applicable statute of limitations. Okay.
Aren't we doing that? Well, currently with the what is it, Rex Huberman situation case, the serial killer. Two new bills aim to amend New York's Son of Sam law to prevent family members of defendant from profiting, off
That's the one that
crimes.
they, in fact, that was the article I looked at just the other day about,
Yes.
that was it last month. A couple of legislators in Albany were going to say, because I think what correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were circumventing the Son of Sam laws by like letting the money go to the mama or the sister or the wife or the family member or something like that.
I
Yes.
think so. Let me see.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Um,
Go back to the headline, you'll see. Lawmakers push to amend Son of Sam laws after Hamerman's estranged wife reportedly paid seven figures by Peacock documentary. Okay, so in other words, that's right. I mean, they're very tough with it. They go after them because that victim services really hunts them down, like you said. But the question here is, okay, they're trying to, if I am paying a relative of the perpetrator, is that not a de facto way of paying that person? I mean, not to delve off into anything a little too much off topic, but that's kind of like what we're seeing with the allegations with President Biden and Hunter. Okay,
yeah.
if Chinese government companies are paying Hunter Biden because he happens to be the vice president's son at the time, then that could be construed as a backdoor way of trying to get the money to Mr. Biden in order to get Mr. Biden to influence policy. That's the allegation. Okay. Similarly, I think that's what the New York law is trying to do with the Son of Sam laws to try to keep, okay, well, but the problem with that law is, okay, what's going to happen is that the wife will just file for divorce from her husband, or they'll find some way to try to sever that, or even argue to say, look, why should I be punished as the wife or as the spouse or as the child or the daughter or someone like that because of something that someone else did that I had no control over? I mean,
Right.
you're infringing upon my First Amendment rights simply because I'm related by blood or family, familiar, affinity with someone else. So I don't see how that's going to fly.
It's interesting. Jack's mom, it kind of brings to this point. Can the BTK's daughter profit from dad's crimes by writing a book or selling a story for a movie? BTK's daughter, bind, torture, and kill Dennis Rader. I think that's his name. His daughter has been kind of speaking out and whatnot, but I'm kind of wondering, would that be the same? It's that
Yeah, it
situation.
would be the same. And to be honest with you, I don't see, because let's think about this for just a minute. Okay. When you are related to somebody who has committed such a heinous act,
Mhm.
that ends up being a scarlet letter on you, whether you like it or not. Okay. I mean, can you imagine going to school? Yeah, I'm BTK's my grandfather is the worst serial killer in history. Okay. You follow what I'm
Yeah.
saying, all right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And presumably that kind of stigma is going to have a bearing on people who had nothing to do with the crime. So, in a way, you could, to say that the daughter can't profit from what her dad did by writing a book and telling her own story would infringe upon her First Amendment rights, I think.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, could you enact law or something that prohibits the daughter from, you know, funneling that money to her father or doing something like that? I mean, maybe there's a way, maybe there's not, through gift tax law or anything along those lines. Maybe, I don't know. But from a pure First Amendment standpoint, I don't see how you can tell a third party who is not a party to the actual action that they can't make money off of telling their story and what they know of their story. Because here's the thing: if the little girl or if the daughter can't profit from the story, okay, then what if the next door neighbors who know about this decided they were going to sell their story? All right. Or what if a first cousin down the road, or so, you know what I'm saying? Where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
Where do you draw the
Yeah.
line? And so it ends up being content. By the way, here's one other way of looking at it. Okay. If I got a judgment against that fella in jail that I told you about, and one of his family members won the lottery, I couldn't go and attach that judgment on the lottery winners, the family members' stuff, because at the end of the day, it belonged to the family member. It didn't belong to my guy.
Right. Right.
I'm suing.
Absolutely.
So I think you've kind of got that same situation, unless you're wanting to limit and put a prior restraint on that speech and say, look, this kind of speech by this person is repugnant to public policy, and therefore we're going to keep you from doing it. And I don't see how you can avoid the scrutiny test that I was telling you about, the least restrictive means.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, like Callie says, Carrie has stated that she feels Carrie is Dennis Rader's daughter. Stated that she feels obligated because of the crimes that her father committed. And Kraken said, stopping telling her story, her telling her story infringes upon her
It
First
does.
Amendment right, which is
Mhm.
what you said. Flossie said, just because someone is related to the person doesn't mean they're culpable for that person's crime. They should be held responsible for being a victim of those crimes as well. I guess that's a question.
And and I'm just thinking off the well, I mean, I got to be careful thinking off the cuff because that might show my own ignorance. But sometimes you like to see how the sausages are made, right, guys? If I'm not mistaken, in the U.S. Constitution, there is a provision against, I believe it's called corruption of blood. I got to study that, but I think it has to do with punishing one person for what another person has done. I got to look into that. I may be wrong. Um,
This is an interesting question. What about lawyers and prosecutors writing books or talking about crime after it's over
well, there are ethical rules that have to do with
on
that.
that?
Yeah, you typically can't write a book or something like that unless you have your client's permission, if I'm not mistaken. But the rules of ethics vary from state to state. Um, you know,
Mm,
but as what is going to be the limiting factor there is going to be the professional ethics of attorney-client privilege and things along those lines, and not so much the propriety of me writing a story about something that I went through and I know. Okay.
gotcha. Oh my god. Well, Mr. Matt, people are asking, and I didn't even give you like a formal your specialties, your legal. Can you give us a little bit of your background and all that
Well,
stuff? I mean,
sure.
other than you're an attorney.
If you're asking me about what my specialty is, I turned 50 in a few days, and I still don't,
Happy birthday.
and I still haven't quite figured out what I want to do when I grow up. To be honest with you, but to answer your question, I'm a general practice attorney. I'm licensed in Mississippi and Tennessee. One second, I'm going to make sure my power cord didn't get unplugged, or we're not going to be talking much longer here.
No worries.
Just
You
a
guys
second.
drop some birthday cakes for Mr. Matt here in the chat, please, and thank
Oh,
you.
that's so very kind of you. Um, so I'm general practice. I joke around and say I do a little bit of almost everything. I'm licensed in Mississippi. I'm licensed in Tennessee. Admitted before the U.S. Supreme Court. Haven't actually. Well, I guess I did appear briefly on something, not in person. That federal case I was telling you about, we asked for cert to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it wasn't granted. So there's something on the U.S. Supreme Court there. There's things that have been filed that got my name in there. So thank y'all for the happy birthday. I really appreciate that.
Hmm.
Um, And but I'm also a registered patent attorney. I don't do an awful lot of that though, compared to what kind of stuff we're doing here.
Yes.
Um, but I file suits. I've got cases pending, like in defamation actions. I think there's one in particular that you and I are quite familiar with.
Yes, there is.
Um, and I'm also uh, working on. I do every now and then a little bit of. I'm trying to get away from this, but the child custody stuff. Gosh,
Yeah.
a little of that. I mean, pretty much anything, almost anything a Mississippi attorney or a Tennessee attorney deals with. I do appeals. So why can't we throw cakes at Matt? He's a lawyer. Thank you. Mhm.
Oh my God. So people can find you and call you and, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you've got something that has to do with Mississippi or Tennessee in some form or fashion, I mean, and you know where to find me.
Mr. Matt is a wealth of knowledge. I'm telling you guys, sometimes I'll be like, do you know anything about this? And it's like, does he know something about that? And if he doesn't, he'll find it. So I
Yeah, thank
appreciate
you.
you answering our questions. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything else that we might have missed or any advice? I mean, I think we answered a lot of the questions
Yeah, I
pertaining
mean,
to,
it's we've I think we've covered everything as far as this is concerned. I mean, you know, um, one of the things we'll throw a little history at you. Um, we back when the First Amendment was written, a little bit after that, Bill of Rights was written. The vice president was Thomas Jefferson, and the president was John Adams. And John Adams had enacted some sedition laws. Basically, said you can't talk bad about the president, you can't do this kind of stuff. And Jefferson did not like that at all. But Jefferson was not in a position where he could write about it in his own name. So he convinced the Kentucky legislature to, pass some resolutions that he had written for them. And in one of the resolutions, the Kentucky resolutions of 1799, I believe, he talks about the differences between federal power and state power. And I'm not trying to get so much into that, but one of the things he mentioned is that, whenever you see the states, when they pass laws, okay, whenever they see a problem, it's their job to try to remedy the problem without making, I forget how he put it, the problem even worse by the remedy that they're using. Okay. In other
okay,
words, there are some violations that we have to just hold our nose to, because the bigger issue of protecting the constitutional right underneath it is more important than fixing the immediate problem that we're trying to find.
okay,
And look that and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's fascinating stuff.
will
So
do. Will do. And then they're asking, does he have a channel? He does.
I
Better
haven't
ask now.
I haven't actually done an awful lot of it lately. I think one of the things I want to start doing this coming year is to do a
Yeah.
little bit more of that. It'll be a little bit of legal, but it'll be a general interest thing. Um, I'm also going to be possibly doing some. I joked about writing a book, doing theology stuff. I meant that kind of flippantly earlier, but I've written some stuff on theology, so I was going to maybe talk about some of those things as well,
That
history,
would be
science, the
awesome.
law, that kind of stuff.
You're
But
very active on
I'm
Facebook though.
yeah.
So
Oh gosh, yes, yes, I am.
Facebook is his kind of
On
hub.
my personal page, I'm very very uh, uh, fluent. Spend way too much time on that, and I've actually started on TikTok now. I've actually
Oh,
started.
so you're on TikTok now?
I'm on TikTok now.
You're
Finally
gonna have
got
to
around to doing TikTok.
please text me that link
Yeah, I
so we can
will.
put it
I
in the
will.
description box. All
Okay.
right. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming through. I appreciate you.
Thank you so
All right.
much. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you. Thank you for the breakdown and for we the people to understand. That was pretty cool. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
appreciate it. Thanks.
Awesome. You have a good one, Mr.
All
Matt.
righty. Bye bye.
Bye. All right, guys. What do you guys think? I mean, we got some questions and answers, and this was the stuff that was going around social media that the people wanted to know. Now you know. Share this live. So those that are wondering about the Son of Sam laws and Gypsy Rose and Nick Go to John and all these people, share this live because it is helpful information, of course. And I'll break it down in little bites and maybe upload it so it's a little bit more kind of helpful. But I mean, if you just want to know, you got the information right there. Thank you so much, Lawyer Mr. Maven. It says, excellent discussion. The topic is a bit gray, which makes it fascinating. Thanks for tackling it. I mean, this is a very hard topic to talk about, to even further understand as somebody who is not a lawyer. To have somebody explain it to you, I thought that was amazing. And I think I definitely want to thank everybody. Simply Me, thank you for becoming a member. And everybody else, Kraken, thank you for being a member for 2 months. And Wim, thank you for gifting. This is something that you just, it's hard. It's hard for us to understand. Absolutely. Shout out to Mr. Tommy Scoville. I got to hit him up and see how he's doing. Shout out to him. And oh, yes, Bunny says, go watch The Bird of Alcatraz. Well, now, I mean, we already know the ending. It wasn't, thank you, Mr. Matt. It wasn't like, you if you want to watch it, I don't know what year it was made. All right. Thank you, Miss Jackie Sue, for the 4.99. But you guys, legal questions, you need an attorney, go check out betteraskmatt.com for all your legal stuff. And if he might not have an answer, but he'll direct you to where you need to go because that has been my experience with him. And I'm glad that he's a channel friend. Shout out to him. Okay, guys, it's Friday, and I might do another live later on tonight. There's some other cases that I'm looking at that I want to get into. I also want to talk about the whole weird shout out that we got from a political website from Florida. Shout out to Aaron Smith Levin, who kind of gave us, and Tinkle Tits, who gave me the heads up about it, and other people who said my channel got mentioned and it was in there. It's just it was bashing Aaron Smith Levin, but it was at the same time dropping our link. So I was like, all right. So suddenly I see an influx of different people from Florida. Shout out to everybody from Clearwater. Okay. Simply Me, thank you so much for the $10. Yes. No, she's like, no begging. We try not to. The only thing I beg for is a like. Hit the like button. It is free 99 to like. You guys have a great one. I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye bye.